Hey everybody, Mike Kriak here. I'm really honored to have Evin, Rouven, and Danny with us. Really three amazing key experts in the field of decentralized identity. Very excited to have them with us today. We're very happy to kind of move up the full tech stack in relation to what's been going on in identity and the real world practical applications. Would like to first start with Danny. Love for him to give us a little bit of an update and dive in from there. It's all yours, Danny.
Cool, thanks, Mike. So there's dozens of different ways to talk about what identity is. And so I like to start by trying to reduce it to its most basic. And the way I think about that is identity is information attached to an identifier in a dependable way. So being able to trace any given set of information back to the person or content that should be associated with it and vice versa. And there's been a ton of work over the last many years trying to do that in a decentralized way. And if we come back to information attached to an identifier, there's some great standards for the information and for the identifiers. So identifiers, we have standards like decentralized identities and a whole set of tooling built around creating those, managing those, publishing those, managing the keys and rotating the keys for those. And on the information side, we have good standards for issuing that information, verified credentials, VCs, term you'll hear, ways to store those, technologies like IPFS and other distributed data to be able to see the provenance of any given piece of information. But what has been missing is a way to complete that loop and attach that information to that identifier. And so being able to trace those back and forth and do that in a really flexible way. And so that's the piece that I and my team at 3Box Labs and other folks building Ceramic Network have been focused on, is bringing that entire loop together so that developers and builders and users have this really solid infrastructure that is as flexible as possible for attaching information to identifiers. And so maybe just really quickly, like the things that you would want in this system at the end of the day, there's going to be lots of different types of identifiers. There's going to be keys, there's going to be many different DIDs, there's lots of existing identifiers in the existing Web 2 world. And so you want flexible usage of identifier. There's probably not going to be a single one that's adopted. You want to be able to use that in lots of different contexts. You want lots of different, on the information side, information types. So not every developer and application and user is going to agree to store information in the same way, in the same place, so according to the same schema. You want, despite that flexibility, a lot of simplicity in how that information is discovered, how it is accessed, ideally a single interface to query and discover and use it. And you want it to be highly trustworthy. This should not be guarded by any one entity. You should not have to do a whole lot of verification to tell that the tracing between the information, the identifier, and who's controlling it is what it says it is. And so you need to be highly dependable with a lot of integrity. And so I'll let Rouven and Evin talk about other parts of this because they've spent more time on different pieces. But what we're building at Ceramic Network is, again, focused on this connection piece. And so the publishing of the mutable contents, and not just the raw information, but dynamic information in a really flexible way. We've modeled it after event streams in really flexible data structures. So being able to kind of label for each of these event streams what that data format should be. Authenticated with a DID. So this identify any kind of decentralized identifier that subscribes to the standard can control and authenticate and manage these event streams. And this just gives a really common way to publish information associated to an identifier, and you can do lots of different things with it. And so we think about this as the lowest level primitive to build these other identity constructs and protocols on top of.
That's awesome, Danny. I know we'll get back to in a little bit more later on in terms of some of the use cases. I'll pass it over actually to Rouven real quick. You've been a leader in this space for quite a while. You've seen a lot in relation to the standards. You've seen a lot in terms of the applied applications of some deep research that has happened in the space. So would love for you to take what Danny has built on there and move us up the stack.
Good. I think one of the learnings when we started 5 years ago, using a smart contract, we had everything on chain, what they described, like an identifier and data. And I think that's what still, I think many people in the community often think about. I think we did a lot of work over the last years on these standards, which you could consider some form of layer 2 because it's off chain. You can do lots of work and bring only the really relevant elements to an on-chain aspect. And one thing we really discovered in the last 3 or 4 years in the industry is like interoperability across the blockchains is where everybody talks about this today. But let's say this abstraction with DIDs that we can interop with other blockchains, other networks is extremely important. And because sovereignty, self-sovereignty is about choice for the end user, and their choice might be that they don't believe in this governance of this network or this network or this, yeah. So interoperability and portability is the 3 key elements in this. So the work of the last years was really making sure that we are connecting across the world with different chains here. It's a very fast moving space. So what we have learned is, well, like we iterated a lot and we rebuilt a lot. And so what the Veramo team is like, the protocols team and ConsenSys Mesh is like, has one of their products is like, Veramo is like an open source framework, which gives a lot of flexibility to integrate and like add new protocols as we go, which are connected with different blockchains, but also speak different languages, so different protocols. It's a core enabler to bridge this. And I think that's kind of where like we can build on Ethereum, we can build on Ceramic, we have like this underlying, let's say, infrastructures, and we want to build kind of the connection into other like ecosystems and networks and kind of bridging this. And that's kind of part of like where we're working on. So it's about integrating like a MetaMask or Ceramic and other pieces and making them useful in the broader SSI community. So that's kind of like part of this. And what it enables, we can talk about later, is as they mentioned, like any type of reputation. I think what people typically like to talk about is KYC and all the other like regulatory reasons why you want some form of reputation, but it opens up way more use cases and possibilities if you think about this.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, a lot of that heavy work that both Danny, you and Rouven have done and created over the past few years, Evin gets to be able to see and realize when she's out in market. Evin is one of those individuals that is consistently talking to clients and prospective clients on applications. And Evin would love to hear a little bit about Serto and the work that you're doing, and then maybe perhaps diving into a couple of use cases there.
Thank you, Mike. So Serto is here for those of us who don't hang out at the command line. We are working toward a world where identities of any sort, you, me, our favorite organizations, our dogs, our cars, can exchange data in a trusted, private, and scalable way without any unnecessary intermediaries. And so we believe deeply that that requires DIDs and VCs on a fundamental level, at least to start with. And so our mission is to catalyze the adoption of these decentralized identity technologies and to make it easy to resolve this critical identity blocker by making it simpler, smoother, more user-friendly to interact with decentralized identity technologies. So we're, the buttons and screens team. And so the way that we combat this friction by making it easier for everybody to use DIDs and VCs is by starting off with user problems. What challenges out there in the ecosystem can we solve with these new superpowers, as Rouven described, of being able to interact cross-chain but maintain your same identity? So from rock stars to smart city infrastructure to French haute couture fashion, the Serto team is empowering creators and data managers to give new life to their existing data assets without having to build complex and costly API integrations. So when it comes to liquidity in L2, that's not just a challenge that we have in DeFi, it's a challenge that we have in the identity space as well. So we are here to help human beings and groups of those human beings more easily decentralize their data operations with each other and provide really simple tools, even no code tools, that employ DIDs and VCs to drastically reduce that cost of coordination.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks, Evin. So I'd like to open up for all of us to chat a little bit about the applications and the use cases here with specific clients. I know, Danny, you're building a lot in relation to the Ceramic network and in relation to working with several key partners to be able to fully realize the potential there. And Evin, I know you've had a couple recent wins in our favorite topic, the NFT space. So, would love to hear a little bit about, I think what we can collectively agree is one of the most fundamental problems with NFTs at the moment as they stand now, which is, this question in relation to what do you actually own? How do you go through discovering? Is there a lack of consistency and cross-chain interoperability? I think a lot of those problems will be solved by identity. A lot of those problems will be solved by establishing standards and building protocols and ensuring the chains that are being built have that opportunity, so that it makes it incredibly easy for platforms to be able to buy, sell, and to market. I think marketplaces are certainly an area that could utilize a significant upgrade in relation to the work that the three of you are doing. So I'd love to hear a little bit about how you're actually helping the NFT space for figuring out what the next generations of NFTs hold. Evin, you've had some quick wins, so maybe I'll pass it over to you, and then Danny would love to hear about some of the conversations you've been having with some of your partners as well.
Thanks, Mike. And that's a great question. I think from an identity perspective, it's been very exciting for us recently because the NFT ecosystem is given a really interactive and accessible way for the global population to start learning and interacting with the decentralized technology space. But as you note, it highlights a big problem with NFTs. So, for those in the audience who might be living under a rock, an NFT is basically a totally unique digital thing. But we frequently associate that with a nominally unique audiovisual art object. And there are a lot of popular sales from Christie's to OpenSea of these works that make them accessible to people around the world today. Now, those NFTs, when we think of those audiovisual art objects, they are going to involve some human readable data, like the title of the work, the name of the artist, a description of the work. And all of that data usually is stored on a centralized server owned and controlled entirely by that issuance and sale platform where the NFT was initially created. Now, if we recall back to what Danny was saying at the very beginning of this conversation, we do not want to have a central intermediary owning and controlling critical data about the identity of things that are important to us. So, what's an ecosystem to do? We need to figure out how NFTs can carry their own data, can hang on to their own provenance, represent information about themselves, rather than relying on hosted platforms to resolve those, the critical context about a given work. Because as we remember from the early 2000s or the 2017, ICO craze, not every platform lasts forever. I hate to say it. And so this means in a few years, we're going to have a bunch of NFTs whose platforms storing their human readable names are no more. So how might we push further to the client side, push to the edges, stop storing in the center, and think about how NFTs can carry this value themselves? And just to call out that last little beef that I have with the NFT ecosystem right now, if we think about revenue splits, so the ability for an NFT maker to share in the resale of their work in perpetuity, that's a really cool and unique capability that we have really for the first time a settlement layer to support in the Ethereum ecosystem. But in order to enjoy that benefit with true fluidity, that NFT should be able to be resold anywhere. But right now, that's not the case. So for example, if you go on OpenSea, you hit a rev split, you mint an NFT. If that NFT moves elsewhere and is resold, you as the creator aren't necessarily going to have the opportunity to participate because that smart contract and those terms of resale are centralized to that platform. And so as you know, Mike, we have been working with some partners in the ecosystem. Actually, a rock band that I used to listen to in high school created their own decentralized identifier so that they might create NFTs that can be easily traced back to their identity. So in this way, DIDs can empower creators so that when they make their own NFTs, they're traced back to their DIDs. But in other ways, at a more sort of Web3 ecological level, our colleagues here, Rouven and Danny, have been thinking a lot about what does it mean for NFTs to have additional features and capabilities on their own that are not going to rely on an enterprise, a corporation, a platform in the middle to enable. So I guess the short challenge that we're addressing here and the Serto team from an NFT perspective is how can we make sure that we don't recreate the recording industry where there are a bunch of corporations that centrally own and control rights, responsibilities, and identity to creative works. And so we can help those creators and visionaries really live in the driver's seat.
Yeah, that's awesome. Danny, I'll pass it over to you. I mean, how do you help solve some of those problems that Evin raised and was further expounded upon in relation to the creator economy or the ownership economy?
Yeah, so I think Evin put it quite well. Some of these problems are technological. Some of them are coming up with better standards and agreements for how these things are going to be done. And so the NFT ecosystem is still quite early. And so things have been, I guess you could call it fly by night, but also just like rapid pace of experimentation, which means not a lot of time to come together and decide what the right patterns are. But I think we're now seeing a little bit of a pullback, which gives everybody time to think about like, how do we solve each of these different problems in turn? And some of them, maybe the biggest ones, I think there's patterns emerging. So Evin called out rightly that we don't want some of this media that this NFT, this ownership on chain points to be on a centralized platform that can disappear, any platform that can disappear. Luckily, we have technologies like IPFS and Arweave that can host some of this. But that's really just the starting point. That's like hosting the raw media content. But as we start to move into other features, and then also the entire economies around these NFTs, because it's not just about features that you can do with them, it's about what develops around them, you hit kind of an ever-expanding set of challenges and opportunities. And so among them is, and Evin talked about this one a little bit too, but who is the creator of an NFT? NFTs are these rights to these things on chain, but those have a lot more value if they're actually backed by some IP or backed by the word of a creator, you know. And we've already seen on a lot of platforms people pretending to be artists to mint NFTs and create a whole bunch of value. And so that is an identity problem. Like, is the person creating this who they say they are? Do they actually have the rights to claim this? We've saw people, trying to sell other people's tweets or other people's reputations. And so when you kind of trace it back to that end, can you link someone's legal identity or their reputation that they've done elsewhere to the creation process? Then once you actually get to the NFT itself and the information contained around it, there's some things on chain, maybe the raw ownership and the rights. There's the kind of media if it's pointing to a piece of art or music file. But then there's the royalty splits, the rights management. What copyright does that sale have embedded? And you need a place to store that. Not all of that should be on chain, whereas Rouven talked about earlier with identity. Years ago, we were managing kind of the connection between identity information on chain. It's really bad for a whole bunch of reasons: cost, rigidity, privacy compromise. But you can't just put it on something like IPFS, which is content addressed. And so you need a dynamic, trustworthy content layer to store these other pieces of the information in the ecosystem. And so that's one of the things that Ceramic as this mutable content layer is solving. Another piece is, what are the rights associated to the current owner of an NFT as this NFT gets passed around? Do they have rights to remix the content, update the content, sign it, whatever? And so this is something that we and Rouven and his team have been working on, turning NFTs into identities themselves, because more than just people can have identities. An NFT can represent an avatar for an organization or a piece of content, and those have their own identities and information. So Rouven, I'll let you take that one a little bit further, but there's an expanding set of things there.
Yeah, as Danny mentioned, like giving like an NFT some form of own identity and like ability to communicate in some form is maybe weird, but it is actually quite interesting. So we have marketing managers who speak on behalf of a brand. So here, an owner of an NFT could post on behalf of this, and like that creates value around the NFT. And if you sell or have future owners or more owners, this could continue to live on more long term. But that's kind of the art and that cool thing. So we built like a hackathon, like a Twitter for NFTs. So give the NFTs the voice to speak, and if you transfer it, and like that's kind of a cool experiment to see how things go. But if you imagine what an NFT can represent, whether it's a card title, whether it's obviously like the rights to certain things, and if you can identify or you can reach out and communicate either as this NFT or you reach out to the owner of an NFT, imagine that you can reach out to the previous owners of your car, or you can say everybody who bought the ticket and spend more than $100 for that, I want to talk to them, and you can build communities around NFTs. And like this, I think opens up some really interesting, like cool use cases. So DIDCOM is like a technology which is developed in this SSI space, where once you have a DID, you have good credentials, now you can start interacting and build a secure, trusted channel, and using an NFT as like the identifier in this case, What you can do is now you can make a community chat, or I can reach out and ask the producer of my car, like, hey, can I get a subscription for something? And it's not, and we have the authenticity that we know we are the truthful owner and the truthful creator of something. And then you can think about, why do we have centralized platforms to negotiate prices for NFTs? Now that I can reach out to any holder of an NFT, I can start in a secure, trustworthy way to negotiate this. That's true decentralization, where you can actually all stack up from the ownership to the communication to making the agreement off chain, and you settle, and you just settle on chain the final agreement. And so there's like a lot of possibilities what this stack gives us with, as Danny mentioned in the beginning, identifiers and authenticity around data, and combined with what Evan said, like putting them in a connection to a real human being or to a real asset.
Rouven, I love what you said in relation to brand managers and how the work that they do in relation to kind of an entity that truly does exist. Various brands obviously known quite well, and they take on a life of their own. I can see a day where NFTs are minting their own social tokens to be able to allow communities to gate them in. These are some really fun ideas and fun features to think about. I know we're just almost at our time, and so maybe would ask if there's any other kind of what's next, something perhaps a little bit more playful, any hackathons any of you have seen. The one, Rouven, that you and your team did was super exciting and fun, and I think it's those types of composable features that, pulling from various other aspects of Web 2 or Web 3 that I think makes this quite interesting. So anything else out in the wild, even not on there, you're working on that you wanted to mention, and then I think probably our time's up.
If nobody starts, I think just maybe broadening what we just talked about, NFTs. I think we live in this interesting space which has so much like potential, but then we all live also in Discord and on Twitter and like all the other things, and like we see this emergence of NFTs in communities. We also see this like more and more momentum around DAOs, and here we're discussing on Zoom, Discord, Twitter, and then we go and click the button there. I think I see identity and all these things we're working on more like a step to make this more native, so that we can build communities around topics of excitement, and then have just like the last step is this on-chain thing. So voting, group forming of opinions, and then using a mechanism to use this information which aggregated as an opinion maybe in your community and put this on chain. I think there's so much coordination things going on where we're all in this weird, like we use Reddit and all the other forms. That's kind of, I think, what I'm excited about, and see that there's a real, I think, convergence of tech.
Yeah,